The morning of April 27, 2021, had barely begun when the tranquility of a condominium in the Bolivian city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra was interrupted by heated shouting coming from one of the units. What had started as a couple's argument inside apartment 124 of the complex soon became a focal point of tension for all the residents of the place. They witnessed the tragedy that unfolded in a matter of minutes. The cameras of their cell phones captured the exact moment when a young couple lost their lives after falling from a 12th floor window. The terrible images began to spread rapidly on social media, awakening the shock of the local population. This feeling was replicated in every corner of the country when it became known that those who had died in that dramatic event were Sarah Arauco and Dagner Rojas, two personalities recognized for their participation in a television program. Speculation to find a logical explanation for what happened did not take long to appear, but only the authorities had the tools in their hands to answer so many questions. Was it perhaps an accident, or was there something more behind that incident? Good evening. Welcome to Night Criminalist. The victims Sarah Arauco Mendoza and Dagner Joaquin Rojas Talamas were models and gym instructors who met after their participation in the television program KL7 International. There, the young people were divided into teams to compete in skill and physical resistance tests in order not to be eliminated and reach the grand final prize. Sarah Arauco Sar was born on May 11, 1997, in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Bolivia, being the eighth of 9 siblings. She was about to finish her law studies and dreamed of becoming a judge to fight against injustices. Her determined character defined her both in her academic life and in her participation in KL7, where she was seen as a bold competitor. She also enjoyed creating content on TikTok, where she shared her love for sports, good nutrition, and everything related to a healthy lifestyle. Thanks to her videos, she had managed to build a community of more than 200,000 followers. Dagner Rojas, for his part, Dagner was originally from the town of Marana, where he had trained as an automotive technician. For several years, he worked in his family's mechanical workshop, but decided to move to Santa Cruz to take a new direction. His parents supported him financially with his studies, rent, and food, and he took care of his personal expenses. Once there, he enrolled in the nutrition and dietetics career, but also gained popularity thanks to his presence on KL7, standing out for his physical performance and extroverted personality. The relationship, although they initially appeared as good friends, in February 2020, they ended up telling their companions and the audience that followed them in each episode that they had started a relationship. Their courtship did not go unnoticed. Every event about this novel bond was exposed on screen. Even when it came to disagreements in one episode of the program, the host publicly questioned Dagner about the apparent distance between them. He responded that they had had problems during Carnival and that he preferred to focus on the competition, leaving love aside. Sarah, for her part, commented with laughter that she found it funny that her partner was upset because she had gone out to celebrate during the festivities. The minute-by-minute follow-up of their relationship led many of their acquaintances to want to take advantage of the exposure to express their opinions. Some competitors on the program mentioned that Sarah had a strong character, which generated conflicts not only within the group, but also with her partner. Others said that Dagner was jealous and did not approve of her posting videos on social media, even going so far as to check her personal accounts. The separation and reconciliation in early April 2020. KL7 temporarily stopped airing due to COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, and since then, the couple stopped being talked about publicly. From that moment on, few people knew what was really happening in their intimacy. It was evident that the relationship had started in the best way. Their opposite personalities and their dominant insecurities caused ups and downs from the beginning. In a year and 4 months of relationship, Sarah and Dagner had separated and reconciled on repeated occasions. Although this was an indication of the damage they were doing to each other, they decided to bet on more. In April 2021, away from the media environment, they celebrated their engagement and were enthusiastic about the idea of formalizing the love they had for each other by getting married in a ceremony they had scheduled for May 11th. When Sarah would turn 25, however, 2 weeks before the big event was to take place, circumstances changed completely. The tragic day, April 27th, 2021. It was around 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 27th, 2021, when a tenant on the 13th floor of the Santa Cruz condominium, who was watching television with her boyfriend, began to hear an argument between a man and a woman. By the tone of their voices and previous experiences, they assumed it was the couple they always heard fighting, so they preferred not to interfere. But the more minutes passed, the louder the screaming became, and the situation began to become worrying. Half an hour later, upon hearing the woman desperately calling for help, the couple on the 13th floor was forced to intervene. They poked their heads out the window and noticed that Sarah, the neighbor from apartment 124, was hanging from the window. While trying to stay safe, Sarah looked up and saw her neighbors. Without saying anything to them, she continued insisting on protecting her life. Dagner was holding her by the hands, but both of their strength was reaching its limit. By then, other residents of the place also stood by their windows and from their homes with extreme tension followed the event second by second. Some of them used their cell phones to record the terrible scene. When the couple on the 13th floor looked away from the situation for a few seconds to call the police. Upon returning, they found an image they could never erase from their memory. Sarah had fallen and hit the ground, dying instantly. Every second of her tragic end had been recorded by the neighbors. Everyone was perplexed by what they had just witnessed, but far from ending there, the impact continued to grow. As soon as he saw how his girlfriend lost her life, Dagner wanted to follow in her footsteps, but a neighbor, alerted by the screams coming from the apartment, ran to his rescue. The front door was open, and upon entering, he saw Dagner about to jump. The man remained calm and initially tried to persuade him not to jump while approaching with slow and cautious steps. But the young man assured that he did not want to continue living. When he was right behind him, Dagner threw himself into the void, and his neighbor managed to grab him from behind when he was about to fall. The young man struggled for several seconds to break free from the man until he finally managed to get away. Dagner's fall was also recorded on video. In the blink of an eye, Sarah and Dagner had lost their lives before the terrified gazes of their neighbors. None of them could believe what they had just witnessed. Before the authorities arrived at the residence, the videos that revealed the fatality that occurred that morning had already begun to circulate on social media to the point of going viral. The investigation television channels arrived minutes after the incident, almost at the same time as the paramedics and police officers. The professionals had just determined that both Sarah and Dagner had died instantly due to the impact of the fall. For their part, the authorities cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence, carrying out the task of recovering the bodies and their imminent transfer to the Forensic Investigation Institute, where the corresponding expert examinations would be performed. The investigators were especially interested in interviewing the main witnesses, as their testimonies would be the fundamental piece to establish a line of investigation. The first statements obtained at the Santa Cruz condominium presented contradictions, as some witnesses claimed that Dagner had pushed Sarah with the intention of making her fall into the void and that she, in a desperate attempt to save herself, had managed to cling to him while holding on with all her strength. The woman was screaming for someone to call the police because her boyfriend was trying to murder her. Far from feeling intimidated, Dagner would have let her fall. Other versions indicated that Sarah had intentionally thrown herself out the window, and that Dagner tried to stop her. But failing to do so, and witnessing how his girlfriend lost her life, he decided to throw himself after her. Based on the preliminary information available, the investigators established two main hypotheses. The couple had committed a double suicide, initiated by Sarah and followed by Dagner after losing his girlfriend. It was a femicide followed by a suicide. Family reactions and public opinion. While the investigators were doing their work, the news began to spread throughout the country. In Mirana, a city more than 3 hours away from Santa Cruz, Antonio Rojas, Dagner's father, turned on the television. That's how he found out that two young people had died after falling from the same floor and building where his son lived. Shocked by what he had just heard, he took his cell phone and dialed his son's number, but the young man did not answer any of his repeated calls. The anguish grew with each attempt. Then he contacted his daughter Maria Eugenia, who also lived in Santa Cruz, and asked her to go to the place to verify her brother's condition. Minutes later, Antonio received the confirmation he never wanted to hear. Dagner was one of the victims. In the vicinity of the building, Sarah's best friend also appeared, visibly affected by the dramatic event. The journalists installed at the scene did not hesitate to approach her to ask questions about the relationship between Sarah and Dagner. The young woman said before the cameras that she did not like Dagner because he was very jealous and did not allow Sarah to have privacy, although she could not affirm that his insecurity made him act with physical violence previously. She knew that the young man did not let Sarah go out or make TikTok videos. She even assured that lately they had been distant and that they had resumed the relationship a week earlier after meeting at a social event. When everything was better, Dagner took advantage of the occasion to propose marriage to Sarah. The digital evidence, the investigation's advances soon came, proving the friend's statements right. The investigators performed digital forensics on Sarah's phone and then found the evidence they needed to confirm their suspicions. Sarah's cell phone contained conversations that showed the instability of the relationship. In a text message conversation that took place 4 days before the events, Sarah and Dagner expressed the love they had for each other. But that feeling changed. On April 26th, when the young man wrote to his girlfriend telling her that he had had a bad night. Despite having been together in the same bed, he had perceived that Sarah did not want to be there, that she did not want to be by his side. The young woman convinced him that this was a product of his imagination and that not all days were perfect. That conversation was the first indication of a tension that existed within the couple, an indication that ended up becoming an act of violence. In one of the last message exchanges that Sarah and Dagner had, which occurred during the early morning of April 27th, past 1 a.m., Sarah complained to Dagner for having left her face bruised after hitting her. The message was accompanied by insults and a photo that proved her accusation. She also threatened to report him. He responded that she had broken his nose and encouraged her to report him because it was her right. He added sarcasm to the conversation, advising her that her lover should be Hector, although it was never officially revealed who he was referring to. Thus, it became evident that Dagner felt jealous of his girlfriend. Finally, they compiled a chat prior to the fatal outcome. On the morning of Tuesday, April 23rd, Sarah told Dagner that she was parked with her car outside the building and needed him to come down with the glasses she had forgotten at his house. Dagner invited her to come up so she could pick them up herself, to which the young woman refused. Sarah mentioned that she had taken sleeping pills, and for minutes they argued about who should go up or down. Finally, it was Sarah who gave in and went to apartment 124 to look for her glasses. The investigators also learned through testimonials from people close to the victims that when Sarah arrived inside the house, Dagner's sister and her boyfriend were there, who quickly decided to leave because they noticed that the spirits between them were agitated. As soon as they left the building, the fight that ended both their lives broke out. The autopsy results, everything seemed to indicate that. The hypothesis of femicide followed by suicide was the most adequate to classify the case. Finally, the results of the investigations and the physical evidence confirmed it. A few days after the tragedy became known, the National Director of the Forensic Investigation Institute, Naira Padilla Garena, reported that according to the autopsy results, both bodies had wounds that had been caused before the fall. In Sarah's case, she had a blow to the lower eyelid on the right side and another on the right side of the chest, while Dagner had scratches on his chest and back. Finally, both suffered closed trauma to the abdomen and chest, closed cranioencephalic trauma, and polytrauma from the fall, causing their instant death. The funerals on April 28th. Sarah's remains were mourned at the family home in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, where she had lived with her parents and siblings. Hours later, the young woman was buried in the cemetery El Parque del Recuerdo, located north of the city. Dagner's body, for its part, was transferred to Semarana, his city of origin, to be mourned at his parents' house. His remains were buried on April 29th in the local cemetery. Case closure 6 days after the terrible event that ended both their lives. The case was closed. According to prosecutor Roger Mariaca's communication to the media, there was no place for a judicial process, because there was no one to charge. The authorities accompanied this information with the request to end speculation so that the two affected families could process their grief in peace. Conclusion: the case of Sarah Arauco and Dagner Rojas left a deep mark on Bolivian society. Their love story, overshadowed by lack of communication and jealousy, exposed the complexity that couples can hide, as well as the warning signs that often go unnoticed both by those close to them and by the protagonists themselves. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. Thank you for joining me in this new broadcast. I bid you farewell, not without first thanking you for your company. And remember, if you are not yet subscribed, I cordially invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is The Night Criminalist. Until the next broadcast, good night.